you're reading and what your understanding may be, especially if you're reading with someone. So why can't a husband and wife be on the same page? Often it's their speed. It's also what they're interested in. It's also in terms of not really focusing on what the shared meaning of what they're going through is. And so shared meaning in a nutshell is when you identify what the things you are, things that are important to you, things that you hold as a high priority, your likes, your dislikes, your goals, your aspirations. And so it's really important to have that kind of conversation before she becomes your wife, by the way. But along the way, you got to understand that a person evolves. And so these things also are going to change. So it's not enough that you had this conversation initially. You got to keep it going. All right. And if you have more questions related to that, feel free to ask me. Mrs. Green, what's going on? Creamy Escapes, what's up? RTJ, thanks for joining us. Creamy Escapes, she says, now, I'm not saying that this is true about all men. However, I found that men are not being sensual. Am I asking too much? No, I don't think that you're asking too much. I think at the end of the day, the number one thing that you can do for a man is actually be clear about what it is that you want. Be clear about what your expectations are. And more important, don't just use words. Provide some additional context. Often we find that because we're all speaking English, or we all may be speaking Spanish, or whatever it is you speak, you make the automatic assumption that you understand the words that I'm saying. And in many ways, the context, there could be cultural context, there could be situational context, a number of different things that can actually still have you off in terms of your common understanding. So make sure that when you talk about how it is that you like to be loved, or even what the central mean, that you actually describe it and that you're very explicit, not implicit, in terms of how you communicate that. All right? Keep the questions going. We love these questions, okay? And we're looking forward to actually answering more. Duchess, what's going on, babe? Oscar Worldwide, what up with you? All right, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate that. So, I have some more questions here in this question bag, but if you ask me any question right now, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. As I like to call it, I call it like, rapid fire in many ways, so that if you have a question, I'm going to give you a response. I'll try to keep it short and not all drawn out, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to turn one question into a whole session, but if you do have more questions behind your question, feel free to go ahead and DM us. And if you want to set up an appointment, a time to talk in person, we can also do that, provided where you are, of course. If you're a little bit far out, well, we're just going to have to go ahead and Zoom it in. But either way, we'll get it squared away, okay? Erotic Boudoir, what's up? Lydia, what up? Okay. The lovely Faith joined. Okay, thank you very much. So we're waiting for our guest of the evening, okay? Adama Bracewell. I'm going to tell you a little bit more later when he joins us, but I'm looking forward to making sure that you guys get to know him as well. Hey, Benny, anytime, no problem at all. If you got more questions, man, I'll see you at the gym and I'll answer the questions then. Yeah, that's right. I'll put you out there, my brother. Anyway, what's your view on long distance relationships? As Nicole. Long distance relationships are for a particular type of individual. One, you got to make sure that you're able to communicate explicitly what your interests are and what your standards are when it comes to communication. Also, you got to make sure that you identify with the right person, that you actually connect with the right person who also has those similar types of, interests and standards. The reason why, because, someone may think that it's cute initially to have a long distance relationship, but they're really not built for it. And you yourself need to also take some introspection and reflect on whether or not that's something that you really are able to do. Also, you want to define when what you talk about when you say a long distance relationship. Are you talking about someone that's just from one part of the city to another, where I'm talking about or the state or the country or the world? And then how often would you see that person? What are your means of communication? How do you prefer to communicate? And things of that nature. So you really need to define it. And I do think that for a certain type of individual or a certain couple, that it can actually work. But you really need to take inventory before you venture down that path. Okay? So I hope I answered your question there. Is there a healthy way to date long distance? Lexi, I agree that thinking along those lines works. A healthy way to date long distance. And the answer is yes, there is a healthy way. Number one, again, you got to make sure that you define the relationship. What does communication look like for you? How often would you like to communicate? Preferred means of communication. These are all key things. How often would you like to see that person ideally? What are ways that you can actually do that? and how much would that take, and what kind of sacrifices would you need to make? Establishing not just the communication, but also trust, right? Making sure that you have a high level of trust and that you don't find yourself worrying the majority of the time or having high levels of anxiety around whether or not this person is being faithful to you and things of that nature. So, yes, I do believe that you can do it, but in order to make sure that that you're successful and that it's healthy, it involves high levels of communication, shared meaning again in terms of where is this really going. You need to also make sure that you're friends. Friendship is extremely important. That way, it's not so much work in terms of how you communicate, how often you communicate, and things of that nature. You also got to have fun. So you got to be, creative about how you're going to have fun and make sure that this person has a special place that can't just be replaced locally. All right. So I hope I was able to answer that question for you in short. Let's see what else. Creamy Escape says, I write exotic stories. I find that women enjoy them more. How do I attract the men to them? That's a great question. How do you actually capture I guess the attention of men that are going to read about it? Well, men tend to be more tangible, but I would say that for a guy that is reading and has a good imagination, I would say that you write things that are going to actually capture his attention in terms of, maybe putting him in a position where he's actually, has a pole position, if you will. He's in control or he's doing certain things in that space. But you are appealing to different types of, mindsets. So, be creative. But at the same time, before you actually put pen to paper or make it permanent, how about you go ahead and grab a group of men and test some things out? Ask some questions about, certain situations that they see as a fantasy or what's ideal for them, and then start to write through their eyes as opposed to, looking at it from a woman's perspective. So I hope I was able to assist you with a short answer, but, give you some of the steps to get started. Ready for relationship consulting? You ready, man? I see you there. You waving, but I need you to join us. So let me see here. I think I got him, and none other than our guy, my friend, my colleague in the game, author extraordinaire. There he is, Adama Bracewell. What's going on with you, boss?
Hey, what's going on, Donovan?
Hey, I can't complain at all, man. It's your
Can
world,
you hear me?
brother.
Okay.
I can hear you nice and clear, good brother. Can you hear me good?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. So, listen, let's just jump right into it. Well, let me just see if there's anybody else have any questions real quick. One of the things, as you already know, with Wednesdays with Wes, we talk about all things relationships, and I often give the audience the opportunity to ask any question under the sun as it relates to relationships. So, we can make sure that this is also reflective of some of their interests. But right after that, we're going to jump right into, from a broken soul to Soulmate. I want to hear all about your perspective on that and also get some of the feedback from the audience, okay?
All right, no problem.
Does that make sense?
Thanks for having me on, man. Let me say that first. Get that out the way.
No problem at all. I appreciate everybody for joining us. Ms. Money Cakes and Julia, thank you also for joining us. So let's get into it. Artina, thanks for joining us. So let's get into it. From broken soul to Soulmate. Tell me a little bit more about this book of yours.
The main title is From Relational Hurt to Spiritual Healing. The subtitle is The Journey from a Broken Soul to a Soulmate. Yep. So basically the book is a devotional. It's a devotional book that to be honest about it, I never planned on writing a book, but I was really just inspired to write a book. The inspiration just came from like my everyday morning devotionals, like just waking up in the morning, praying and reading the word. And as I read the word, the word started to read me more. And I started seeing these different stories in the Bibles, these different lessons, these different principles, and how they related to our everyday relationships. For instance, I came across the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and when Lot and his wife was told to leave Sodom and Gomorrah, but when she turned around, she turned into a pillar of salt. And after I read that, I started to think like how similar that is to people like us when we're stuck in toxic relationships, and when we have an opportunity to walk away and to leave, we look back, or sometimes we even go back, and we end up missing out on what God has for us because we was looking at what was behind us. You know, so
Okay.
just reading the Bible, these stories just started popping out to me, and these lessons and these different principles. And before I knew it, I had written over 100 devotionals. You know, all didn't go in a book. They all didn't go in a book, but the ones that made the first cut, you know, they made it in there, and that's how the book came about.
Okay, that's dope. Now, for those who don't know, give us just a little bit of history about, you know, your journey, not just as it relates to the book, but just in the whole industry of relationships.
Well, by profession, I'm a therapist. You know, I went to school. I went to Temple University. I majored in psychology. Then I went to Chestnut Hill College, where I got my graduate degree, and where I majored in clinical psychology, and I had a concentration in marriage and family therapy. So over the past 11 years, I've been working as a psychotherapist, working with children, with families, and with couples, just trying to help them develop healthier relationships, like a healthier bond. So aside from that, of course, I have my own personal experience when it comes to relationships, makeups and breakups and heartaches, and good times and great times also. So, you know, I've experienced a lot when it comes to relationships. So, you know, I think that made me qualified to start to write. That's just some of my background.
No, I love it. I love it. So on the topic of healthy relationships, give us your breakdown of what constitutes, or what are the components, what's the secret recipe for a healthy relationship?
The secret component to a healthy relationship, I always say, in order to be in a healthy relationship, you have to be a healthy individual.
Okay.
And if you're a healthy individual, that can transfer to a healthy relationship. So when I think of a healthy individual, first, I think of someone that has overcome or healed from past pain and past hurt. Someone that knows themselves, you know, someone that has discovered themselves and true to themselves. Someone that has developed a mutuality mindset. When I say mutuality mindset, I mean, at a certain point during our singleness, we have to remove ourselves from that me mindset and move into that us mindset, that you and I type of mindset, and also having a strong spiritual life, a relationship with God. I think those four things gets a person ready and prepared to be in a healthy relationship. If you can take those things with you, I think that's a good start.
Okay, I like that. So on the topic of healing, I'm glad that you mentioned it, because let's just kind of start in that space where we're going to tie it into your book a little bit, and we talk about the broken soul, right? The broken down soul, and you're in that place where, you know, you just came out of a situation, or perhaps you're still in a situation. I heard you earlier also talk about being in that toxic relationship. You jumped into the Bible. You talked about her turning into a pillar of salt. So let's just talk a little bit about that, you know, that space that you're in that moment, and where do you pick up the pieces? How do you get moving?
It's definitely a process, and everybody's process is different. You know, I think there's some similarities in everybody's process. You know, there's some ups and downs. Everybody's on a different road, but I think one of the main things an individual have to do to begin healing is to take ownership. Really take ownership of the pain. Take ownership of the part that you played in the pain, and you know, get away from the blame and the pointing fingers and what he or she did to me, and really, you know, take ownership of what you can do and what you can fix, and start to move in that direction. I think if we don't take ownership of that pain and that hurt and the part that we played in any toxic relationship, and we continue to look at the other person like we can never get healed. We'll never be healed, because we can't control the other person. We can only control ourselves.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think at the end of the day, you know, being present and acknowledging your part to deal with that crisis, right? I'm in this situation, but what is my part to do with it? If you're still in it, And if you're not in it, still reflecting and being able to say, okay, what are the lessons I can actually learn in terms of my role and how I function in that space? And I think there's one thing that we should tie very closely to that, and that is after acknowledging your part to do in that relationship, putting yourself in a position to forgive yourself of your role, your part, right? Because it's really hard, I think, to be able to point the finger or look in the mirror if you also are not in a space where you can understand that, you know, that's not where the story ends. You can actually, you know, forgive yourself, and you can learn beyond this moment and be bigger than your past transgressions or mistakes, if you will.
Yeah. Forgiveness and letting go is like one of the biggest steps to healing. Like, cause holding on to those grudges, holding on to that pain and that anger or that frustration or resentment. You know, I once heard someone say, holding on to that anger or grudges is like drinking poison, hoping that the other person will die. And
right.
Yeah, and without forgiveness, we really can't move on and be ready for a healthy relationship, because what we're going to do, we're going to take that anger and that resentment from that relationship to the next one, to the next one. It just becomes a continuous cycle. Yeah, so forgiveness and forgiveness is a big step when it comes to healing, even though it's probably one of the hardest things to do.
I really agree with you on that. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of it being one of the hardest things to do. So now that you've acknowledged your part, your role in this situation, and you've also gone through the very arduous task, right, of forgiving yourself, what's the next thing you should do as you're on your road to being more healthy and being also available to be someone's soulmate? What are you doing as you're emerging from the ashes, the debris of this broken state that you're in, after that, you know, forgiveness of yourself, being present, you know, acknowledging your part? What's the next step from your perspective?
Well, I believe the next step, that's where getting to know who you are comes in. Because after you come out of a toxic relationship or unhealthy relationship, like, you're filled with confusion. You probably feel unsafe in your own body. Depend on what type of unhealthy, toxic relationship you was in. So we really have to take that time to get to know who we are again, or probably get to know who we are from the beginning, because our self-worth was damaged. Our self-esteem could be damaged. Our self-image, the way we look at ourselves is damaged after coming out of a toxic relationship. So we really need to take the time to get to know who we are, accept who we are, and make improvements on who we are and who we want to be. So that's self-work. Yeah, that's self-work.
You know, one thing that you mentioned just now too, and I think it's important, is to get to know yourself from the beginning, right? Because here's another thing to really consider. All of your systems may actually be off. There may be things that you thought you were doing well in that relationship, and the reality is no, it was just because of the standards of that relationship that you thought you were doing well. And so I think it's important that you do a full diagnostic, if you will, right? From head to toe, in terms of, you know, your body of work, your energy, your spirit, the whole nine, and really, as you mentioned, get to know yourself again, post relationship, because there are some things obviously that you have the potential to learn. I'm going to say the potential, because again, you know, coming out of a relationship or even being in that relationship, it's very hard sometimes to really focus on the lesson at the time when you might really be interpreting everything or digesting everything more so as just a loss, right?
Yeah. And you said a very important piece when you said that you thought that you was doing everything right, but you actually weren't. And that made me think of something that we do, like in the world of psychology. There's something called developmental trauma, and what that really is growing up in trauma so much that you don't realize that the things that you're experiencing, the things that are going around you are actually abnormal. It's actually unhealthy. But being that everything in your environment is going through the same thing, everybody has been sexually assaulted. Everybody go through domestic violence. Everybody's arguing. Everybody is fighting. So many of your friends have been raped that you don't realize that stuff is unhealthy because everybody around you has been through it. So we develop in that type of trauma, and we just take that from relationship to the next, not realizing, like, listen, this is totally against a healthy relationship. This is not what we should be. This is not what a healthy relationship looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, we
So
normalize it, and that's a huge problem. And so Creamy Escape says, what about if your pain developed into an anxiety and fear? And this is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about, you know, when you have this kind of pain, or you're going through a lot of past experiences, and you haven't actually healed. And healing, by the way, is really nothing more than being very deliberate and intentional about addressing some of those emotional issues, those emotional minds that exist as a result of the drama that you've been through in your relationship, or just past relationships. So just being very intentional in addressing it, whether through, of course, starting with your tribe, someone that you trust, evolving to a professional, but being very intentional about it. And if not, by the way, what tends to happen is you get a whole bunch of these emotional minds that just, that you may seem healthy, you may seem like everything's all right, and then you realize at some point when that trigger is set again, right? You go 0 to 1,000 real quick because you never addressed that issue to begin with, and at that point, most times you're actually out of control. You can't even stop yourself from how you may react, whether it is shutting down, literally snapping, or becoming a recluse all of a sudden. But these things tend to happen. These types of anxieties and fears, they metastasize as a result of the pain that you've gone through that you haven't actually been intentional about addressing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something that I like to call good grief. Good grief. And that's when you're going through those fears and those anxieties and how they develop from like being in a toxic relationship. Like it doesn't start off with fear and anxiety. It starts off with some smallest sadness. But when we don't know how to grieve in a healthy way, those things grow and they develop to something bigger. It goes from sadness to depression, and it goes from depression to even hallucination. It can go from hallucination to suicidal ideations. And before you know it, you're walking around with all this anxiety, all this fear, because you never learned how to properly grieve a loss. So we, as individuals, we really need to learn how to grieve in a good, healthy way. We can't turn to alcohol, can't turn to sex, can't turn to finding someone else to replace the person you lost. Like, all those things are just Band-Aids that never really heal. You're just covering up the wound. So
you gotta stop self-medicating, right? You got to cut that out, and and you got to, because at the end of the day, as you just mentioned, whatever you're going to do, more than likely, it's going to be very temporary, and it's not going to stop the inevitable. And so, on that topic, ladies and gentlemen, what questions do you have as it relates to, as we're talking about, from a broken soul to being a soulmate? But there may also be questions that you may have as it relates to just your relationship, a past relationship, or anything in that arena. Feel free to just go ahead and chime in by way of asking your question right here in the thread. Obviously, if it's something that's so deep that and it's of a private nature, but you still would like to get addressed, feel free also to DM us. I got my team that's also paying attention to the DM, and they'll relay the question to me so that I can make sure that we're covering your topic. So I see Pumpkin, you said, who do you confide in when you're in this state? So I'm gonna give you the first opportunity to go ahead and answer that question.
I mean, hopefully everyone has a support system in their life, someone that they can go to, and they can share those deep, intimate secrets or sadnesses or whatever they go through. But I understand everyone does not have that. That's why there's professionals, there's therapists, there's counselors, there's mentors, there's pastors, but there's always help out there. Sometimes it just takes us taking that step to find those resources. Like, if we don't have that in our natural system or our natural environment, we might have to step out the box and get some help and find someone to speak to in that way.
Right. I totally agree with you. I think that, number one, when you're looking at or identifying someone that you can confide in, you want to look at someone that that you can trust, and also provide a safe environment for you to share these things with. That's not going to pass judgment. And you're looking for someone that's a good listener. Not all the time as you're communicating what's going on with you do you want to go straight into action mode, but just someone at least that can get you comfortable with communicating overall. Because sometimes a premature response to whatever you're going to communicate, especially during that time, if you're not comfortable communicating just yet, may actually cause you to shut down, or you may feel like you need to shut down as a result of that. So I believe that environment is very fragile. That moment is very fragile. So identify someone that you can trust, that has your best interests at heart, and then also look at some plan Bs in terms of some professionals that you can also transition to once you start to get a little bit more comfortable, if you're not ready automatically to go to that level. But I think it's very important. And I know, Lydia, you mentioned earlier about Cream Escape's question about fears and anxiety, and I believe we answered that. But if you still would like some more detail on what to do in that regard, feel free to just go ahead and pump that question back through. Allie, you said people with childhood trauma are difficult in relationships. At what point does a person with these issues get help? They always think everyone else has issues, but not themselves. Good ones.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. When we have those deep rooted traumas, kind of like that developmental trauma that I was speaking about earlier, it's much harder to uncover, and it's much harder to deal with. And the honest truth is that unless a person is actually ready and prepared to receive the help, it'll be hard to heal. It'll be hard to heal. So kind of like I said from the beginning, like that person has to take ownership. They have to have that moment in the mirror when they say, I really need the help. You can support as much as you can, but it takes them to take that step to actually getting the help in order for them to heal.
I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. When it comes down to this, you're talking about trying to facilitate what I would call like a soft intervention. And that's when you identify people that also has this person's, best interest at heart, but more importantly, that are credible to this individual, and see if you can, basically get them to mirror your message, right, and have a common message around what you see as an area of concern, not necessarily being critical and saying, oh, I think you're off, or I think X, Y, and Z, but I'm concerned about you. I'm concerned about your welfare. I'm concerned about how you're responding to certain things. There's certain things that we overall observe. And so creating that, that culture of accountability and reestablishing a tribe, if you will, that lets that person know, here's the reality that we're all experiencing. But also, to that same person, you got to appeal to some of their value systems as well. So when someone feels like there's something that is in danger, or there's a serious consequence to not addressing some of these challenges that they're having, these developmental challenges, these traumas that they've experienced, often you're going to miss them in terms of the message. So identifying what's important in terms of their value system is very key. It can be things such as the possible loss of their child or children. It could be the loss of their job. It could be being in greater alignment from a religious standpoint. But really tune into that person and what do they see as a part of their value system, and have some discussion around what they're going through, how that may impede them from actually being able to maintain these other freedoms, if you will. All right. So any other questions? I see you've got a lot of people that chimed in, different things here and there, but I wanted to know if there was anything else you guys have as questions. For yourself, when you talk about, the journey to soulmate, what are the things right now that you're looking for as it relates to a soulmate? If you're dating, as you're interacting with people, whether it's, social media, online, or if it's in person, if it's at church or whatever, what are some of the qualities on the surface that you may actually respond to and say, you know what, I think I see some breadcrumbs that are leading me to the right direction. when it comes to interacting with this person?
Well, I think first and foremost, I look for someone that has a relationship with God. Um, I'm constantly trying to develop my relationship and grow mine, so I would want someone that's equally yoked in that and going in this and going at least in the same direction that I'm going into. But then
Okay.
after that, it's kind of like all the things that we all admire in people, like someone that comes with their own joy, someone that's peaceful, someone that's kind, someone that's loving, someone that's nurturing. You know, there's a lot of characters that I look for, and maybe that's the issue. I look for. There's a
Well,
lot of
do you think,
characters.
well, on that topic, do you think that your list is a little high? I talk a lot well, I'm gonna say to my circle. I'm not gonna put anybody on blast, but I'm not gonna mention any names. But do you feel like you're part of that tribe that also, should probably look at that list and shorten it just a little bit, or be more flexible in certain things? Or do you believe that what you're looking for is just that unique, and well, the reason why the journey is a little longer is because the treasure is a little more unique than the average?
I think the better person that I've become, the better man that I've become, the more selective I've become, because I've recognized my purpose in life, and I'm really looking for someone that will align with that purpose, someone that will support it, and someone that will go in the same, at least go in a similar direction as I'm going. Now, I'm not gonna lie. I do look in the mirror sometimes and say, maybe I need to check this list out. But every time I look at the list, there's not much that I can scratch off of it, because I think what I have on the list are their good qualities. I don't think I'm not asking for anything outlandish, anything
Right.
that's absurd. There are good qualities that I think that most people that you would just want in a good person. But every day, but I do look at the list. There's some,
Okay.
it's a saying that I often tell people: if you turn everything into a deal breaker, you're never going to close the deal. So I try to make sure that I'm never caught in that category where I have too many deal breakers. So
I like that. That's good. That's good. I like that a lot. So, Wise Lady asked if you could explain a little bit more about soul ties and soulmate. Can you explain if there's a difference, what that is?
well, soul ties. From what I know, I'm not an expert on soul ties. From what I know about and what I've read about soul ties always come with a negative connotation to it. It always comes with comes as a result of not only a sexual connection or ungodly sexual connection, but an ungodly connection with anyone, whether it's through sex or just through interaction, that you can get bonded with someone. Of course, that sexual connection is probably the strongest bond that you can create. But when I think about soulmates, it's kind of what I was talking about a few seconds ago. When you find somebody that's in alignment with your purpose, that's in alignment with your spirit, has nothing to do with sexuality or sex, but it has more to do with your morals, your character, your values, your interests, and you guys just work well together. Doesn't mean you guys are the same. It just means that you guys are compatible.
I'm glad that you said that. I think at the end of the day, sometimes people may think that, a soulmate is somebody that is like their twin, of the opposite sex, or, a twin of interest. And I'm glad that you mentioned that person doesn't have to be, a carbon copy at all. But I think that at the end of the day, there's a meshing of the spirit. There's a certain energy. And as you say, as a lot of people say, it's a vibe. There's a certain kind of vibe is on, that you it's not even all tangible in many ways. Sometimes it can be just that person that you can be in each other's space, and you can find joy in just each other's space. And it doesn't necessarily have to come with a lot of, distractions or material, or as you mentioned, or even the physical aspect of it doesn't necessarily have to be, the number one leading component or part of the recipe. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now crazy Jamaican babe, she mentioned someone that comes with their own joy. So she loved that part of your comment, and I enjoyed that as well. I think someone that as you already know, being happy is usually from something that's external, but actually having joy is something that's internal. So coming with your own joy, meaning that inside you possess a certain amount of joy, and it can only be accentuated, so to speak, by your attendance or your participation and things of that nature. But they have theirs already good to go, if you will. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you enjoyed that, crazy Jamaican babe. Wise lady said, "Thank you. I just watched. I just wanted to clear the air for some who may not understand the difference." And thanks, man, for providing some additional clarity from that standpoint. So for ladies and gentlemen that are right now on the thread, what other questions and comments do you have as it relates to this topic or relationships in general? There's a lot of things that we covered in a short period of time, but as you already know this, it's about you. What are your questions? What are your comments? What are your concerns? Do you have any additional thoughts on this topic of from a broken soul to a soulmate and the journey? I think that at the end of the day, you brought up Adama. You brought up a lot of great thoughts and perspectives, and I like the idea that you started with writing a devotion. And for many people that are not into devotions and all that other good stuff, at the end of the day, from a layman's perspective, what you're doing is you're rewiring your brain. You're setting your expectations. You're monitoring your spirit and your energy overall in terms of what you should expect and how you should really, put your energy out there, on a regular basis, so that you don't, if you did before, you don't continue the momentum of what some would refer to as a negative sentiment override as it relates to how you see people, relationships, the world in general. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that you said. I think I was thinking about the question you previously asked me. If you don't mind me adding to it, you asked me what I was looking for in a mate, and then I sit and think like that's a difficult question for me to answer, because I think I'm at the point in life where I'm no longer focused on what I can get or look for from somebody, but I'm more focused on, okay, what am I bringing to someone? Like I talked about that joy and that peace and that love and the patience. Like, am I cultivating that inside me in order to bring that to someone else's life? Like if somebody so I want to have enough joy where I can bring someone else some happiness. Or I want to have enough peace where I can make someone else's life peaceful, so I can bring peace to them now. So it's funny. I rarely think about what am I looking for in a person anymore. I'm more focused on how can I make myself better, so when I do find that person, I'm making their life better. So that's just a piece I wanted to add to that question.
No, I like your comment, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, you're talking about being lead servant. You're talking about, being a person that is, providing solutions, providing security, providing, as you mentioned, providing happiness, and not focused on, what can I get? Actually, what you're talking about is a lot of the tenements of agape love, of actually loving for love's sake, and not that old school contractual, very toxic, quid pro quo approach to finding a mate and to being in a marriage and things of that nature. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Let me see. I got a couple comments. Creamy Escape says, I'm sitting here with a few ladies watching this, and one of the ladies asks, why hasn't her mate proposed to her after 20 years together? Does he feel she is not worthy? That's a great question. Now, again, it goes back to, how you define that relationship and where both of them are at. What are the highs and lows of that relationship? I wouldn't say automatically it goes down to, whether or not someone is worthy. Often we look at things in a very sequential manner in terms of, when I am married, I will act like this, or, when I'm single, I'll do this. I'll function in this kind of space. And often we don't take as much inventory of, am I a husband now? Am I a wife now? And I think that's a big question to ask yourself. Often in a 20-year relationship, there's been a lot of negotiating in terms of, what are the rules? What's the situation? Did it just get comfortable? Was there an actual plan to begin with in terms of the goal being marriage? And were you clear and transparent, very deliberate and explicit in talking about, what your expectations are? Was he the same way in terms of where his expectations are? And now are you just in a situation where it's a holding pattern because it's not really going to get to that level, and you both are not, are not being aggressive about it? So from my perspective, I don't think it's not about being worthy. I think that there are a lot of things that were undefined from the beginning. And perhaps there's an ugly or tough conversation to be had in regards to, where to go at this point in the game. What about yourself, Adama? What do you think?
Well, a few months ago, my answer probably would have been like 20 years. You need to leave that relationship. But just 2 months ago, I was in a wedding of a good friend of mine who was with his girl for 20 years. And they got married 2 months ago after being together for 20 years. So I would say nothing is impossible. I think when I spoke to him and what he said, what changed, he got to a point of readiness. He got to a point, it took him 20 years, but he got to the point where he felt like he was ready, he was mature enough, and he was able to make the commitment that she wanted from him. Now, I don't know the person's situation personally, but after experiencing that and seeing that, I can say that it's not impossible that if marriage is what she wants after 20 years, that it's possible that it can happen. Because I was just in a wedding 2 months ago for a couple in the same situation.
I agree. And again, you got to go right back to the point I made earlier, and that is, am I a husband? Am I a wife? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself, and not look at, okay, well, when I become a husband or when I become a wife, I'm going to start doing this and doing that. Put yourself in the actual role, but also more importantly, have some serious conversations and get some clarity in terms of what your goals and your objectives are, and what does that actually look like. So I see Pumpkin from Pluto. She asked if she can get a devotional excerpt, if she can hear one of those devotional excerpts. I'm not sure if you have your book with you, or if you just want to direct everyone to grab the book and they can read it themselves. I'm pretty sure that'll be more, something that will be to your liking, right?
Yeah, I can send her a sample, but it will definitely be great to go grab the book. I'll also send you where to find the book.
All right, good. So you heard that, Pumpkin from Pluto. Make sure that you do that, and maybe you guys can exchange information. She's got some great pieces as well. She does some spoken word, and also she performs. She'll be joining us in Atlanta. She's in Atlanta now. We'll be there October 4th, and she'll be doing a piece at our event, the relationship script. So we're looking forward to to her participation. Lexi, you said, what exercises can you practice to prepare yourself for dating or a new relationship?
What exercises can you practice?
Yep.
Well, to prepare yourself, I think it's definitely an inner work that we have to do to prepare ourselves. Now, if we're talking about healing and coming out of a toxic relationship, in order to prepare ourselves for a healthy relationship, I think we have to learn how to set the atmosphere for healing. You have to figure out kind of what your triggers are, and what are those things that bring you calmness, what are those things that bring you peace, what are those things that lead you in a direction of healing. Some people meditate, some people listen to music, some people exercise, some people read good books, some people go to counseling. It all depends on what fits your lifestyle. But I think it definitely should start with looking in the mirror and working on self in order to get ready for a relationship. I don't think. Yeah, so that's where I would start.
Yeah, you got to start with yourself. You got to, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, when you start talking about exercises, the first thing I would say is you got to go into a place of reflection and introspection. You got to forgive yourself. You have to talk regularly, communicate regularly. So sometimes, just starting off with a journal or a diary where you write out and you express yourself may be good. And then, identify a confidant, perhaps a professional then that you could talk to and see regularly. I think meditation and prayer is also key. Getting closer to God, getting closer to your God is very key so that you can also now become more healthy. Also socializing again. There are a lot of times that when we go into a relationship and then, when we get out of it, everyone kind of gave up on us because, we were always booed up or something to that effect. So re-immersing yourself around some good friends and getting that positive energy going. Going to the gym, I'm a big fan of that. Go to the gym and work it out and get rid of some of those toxins. Get into a healthy space in terms of how you eat. Don't do any of that, pity party stuff. And by the way, when you're doing all of this to get yourself together, don't do this with the objective of I'm going to show who you broke up with or any. Get out of that space. This is all for you. So, you want to get into that space where you're just healing yourself. You're working on yourself in all those areas, physically, spiritually, mentally. Get into some visualization techniques, even if it's for 30 seconds to a minute a day, where you just look at yourself at the end of your journey in terms of being happier and successful, and what does that look like. And don't be afraid. Here's the hardest part, but don't be afraid to just have some conversation with people. Just talk with people, interact with people, and at the end of the day, you're not signing any contract. You're just, socializing and opening up and getting an understanding of, who's out there and that type of thing. And if you do those things, I think you start to put yourself in a space where it doesn't become so traumatic the minute that you say, okay, you know what, I may actually go on a date with somebody. Remember, the date is not a contract. The date is for entertainment purposes. It's for preliminary, awareness of who this person is and if there's some areas that you guys may overlap when it comes to interests. All right?
Yeah. And if I could add real quick, I think what you said is so important, like just getting out there and starting to date again, because that's a good way to measure if you're actually ready. You're able to see, are you able to be vulnerable? Can you communicate well? Are you willing to sacrifice? All those things that we need in order to be in a healthy relationship. We need to be able to support someone. So just dating and getting out there and interacting and integrating yourself with people, you can measure those things to see where you are and what your level is when it comes to that. Sometimes you might have to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, I'm not vulnerable enough. I still have this wall up. I'm not ready to date, or I'm not ready for a relationship. Then you have to go in and work on that. Or, hey, my communication needs some improvement. And you have to go back and work on that. So, getting out there is very important.
Totally agree with you. You got to be honest with yourself. And more importantly, you just now mentioned something about, if you're not ready, right? It's okay to do, it's okay to continue to work on yourself. It's okay to date yourself, love on yourself some more, and get more comfortable with who you are post-relationship or even in this season. Know what season you're in. Save a lot of time in terms of, how you interact with people, and also more importantly, how you manage expectations. So I know real sample size, you said dating can be scary nowadays. It can be. Here's how it becomes scary, though. It first starts off as being scary because that's where it started in your brain. And what you have to do is you have to understand that it's scary because you make it scary. It doesn't have to be scary. Yes, there's going to be a fair amount of people out there that are, they're about what they're about, right? But that's all right, because you're a unique person, and so your search for someone that's unique is going to entail some people that are not a good fit. But you're not going to know if they're not a good fit unless you put yourself out there and that you open yourself up and that you become a little more vulnerable and transparent by way of how you communicate and interact with people. Because one problem is going to exist and persist throughout your lifetime, and that is your representative meeting someone else's representative and no one getting to know one another during that process, because we're functioning out of fear. And so now all the things we do are out of strategy, which is going to be deceitful, even though that's not in our heart. But, we're coming from a place of fear and protecting our heart, which at the end of the day means another wall goes up, a mask, it's fitted onto our face, and it's a long time before we really get a sense of who we're interacting with, much less, sharing who we really are to that other person. I see Lexi says you just have to date safely and always be cautious. Absolutely. Eyes wide open, and, do what you got to do. Thank you, Allie, for saying the conversation is awesome. As you already know, it's 9:56, and we're about to, wind down. I want you, Adama, to tell people how to get in touch with you, how to pick up your book and all that good stuff.
You can go to my website, readyforrelationship.com, or you can contact me on Instagram with the same thing. That's ready4relationship.com, readyforrelationship.com, and you can find me on Facebook under the same thing. So just ready4relationship. You can get in contact with me.
Great. And looking forward to having you on one of our future relationship script, events. You participated a while ago. We're looking forward to having you come back in the very near future. But if you're just now tuning in and you didn't catch this conversation, you can catch us again on YouTube at the relationship script. So just look it up. And this, along with our past, shows are on YouTube. So you'll be able to catch that. Also, if you're in ATL, if you're in the Georgia area, if you're in Florida and you want to fly up or whatever, it's going to be worth it. October 4th, we have our event. It's called the Relationship Script, as you already know. And the theme, man, look, through thick and thin, all right, what men really want. So it's going to be great. Fellas come out, ladies come out. It's going to be off the chain. I got some great special guest co-hosts. I have great entertainment, as you already know, and it's going to be at Sweet Lounge there in ATL. So you already know it's going to be a lit situation as usual, nothing less. But I need you to tune in and make sure that you're in the building if you're in that area. Also, of course, you already know we're going to come back to Philly at some point. I'm working out some details because I'm really a big stickler for the venue. But check it out. Every Wednesday, as you already know, in between time, catch us right here, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the Relationship Script. Tell your friends, forward this, share this. Nothing but great communication, great conversation, great co-hosts like my man Adama here, who are going to bring you amazing perspectives, quality information that you can use. And I hope that at the end of the day, everyone that tuned in felt like this was a good investment of your time. But the only way that we can continue this is if this continues to grow. So I need everyone that can hear me, that can see me. Please share this with someone else. And we're looking forward to having even more people next Wednesday with Wednesdays with Wes. And by the way, this is all about you. So any question you have that wasn't answered, we will get to that either in the DM or next week at the next Wednesday with Wes. Adama, thank you so much, good brother.
Thank you, brother.
You, man.
I appreciate you too, man.
Much respect and love. And for everybody else, I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday with Wednesdays with Wes. This is Donovan Hitchmaster West, and I'm out.